photography at Woodstock, now in Kingston. Why, you ask? Because Kingston's way more fun. And we also, this is our rented space. We've been here for 3 years. And we just purchased a building down the street where we will, in the future, host these artist talks. We will also have a library. We will also have a bigger digital media lab. We have a digital media lab right there now. It's where we host our workshops. It's a lot on the horizon, so please stay tuned. I'm going to do a little bit of announcements, and then we're going to get to the main attraction. My name is Sarah Danziger. I do programming here at CPW, so I'm going to talk about some of my programs in case you don't already know. We have some workshops started last week. This weekend we have Baldwin Lee. We still have some spots in there, so if anyone has been interested in seeing how the man works behind the curtain, that would be a great weekend to come out for. He'll also be looking at portfolios and talking about work and talking about his history with Walker Evans and Minor White. So if that interests you, that'll be fun. We also have a workshop with Naima Green and local community herbalist Munda Nabushi. That's going to be a really special weekend. It's sliding scale 50 to 350. Pay what you can. We'll be not only learning about plants here in Kingston and how we connect with them, whether we know it or not, but also we'll be doing cyanotypes and learning that process. So that'll be a really fun weekend. We also have two openings on June 1st. One is Pride and Protest, photographs by Fred McDara. Those will be, they'll also be joined by an opening over at our other building, which will be of Bard Thesis show. So if you're not familiar with Fred McDara's images, he was photographing a lot in the mid 60s through the 80s in New York. He documented all these images will represent views of queer culture, life, and the LGBTQ rights movement in New York City. So, and the Bard Thesis show will be lots of different work from all of the graduating seniors. Hello. And that's free, and we'll be partying over at our other building later that evening. So please join us. Hello. Now I'll get to the main attraction. Mollie McKinley, CPW member, and also interdisciplinary artist whose practice forges relationships between photographic image and sculpture. Based in the Hudson Valley of New York, McKinley's work has been shown at Friedman Gallery, NADA, the Contemporary Jewish Museum, Pioneer Works, Urban Glass, Independent Curators International, the Dorsky Museum at SUNY New Paltz, the Museum of Arts and Design, Anthology Film Archives, and others. McKinley holds a BA in photography from Bard College and an MFA from Sculptural Dimensional Studies from Alfred University. She is a contributor to the How-To Kit, co-published by the Walker Arts Center and Dia Foundation. I highly recommend that book. It's really amazing, really helpful for anyone trying to do youth programming in and around arts institutions. And lastly, she just wrapped up a Lightwork residency in February, in March. So we are very excited to hear what Mollie has been up to. Can we give her a round of applause?
Hi, thank you so much, Sarah. Like Sarah said, I am actually a CPW member. It's an amazing place to print, so I highly recommend it for any of you photographers that maybe are not already engaged. Yeah, I'm Mollie McKinley. I am based in Newburgh. I've been in the Hudson Valley for a really long time. I did go to the Bard photography program, and then through some circuitous paths, ended up making sculpture. And so I know that this is a photo institution, but we're going to enter into talking about my work in photo through sculpture. And I hope that we can, just embrace like the interdisciplinarity of that. I've really been thinking about this current work of mine in terms of this idea of gloop phenomena, which is related to my interests in alchemy and this elemental quality of alchemy. So looking at ecology, but things much deeper than that as well. And really my practice comes from questioning, right? Like I think that I don't ever try to answer questions, but I'm always actively questioning things and looking at transformation through this kind of always unknowing or sort of existential sense of wanting to know what's going on. Here's our little bog Furby that's been taken over by ecology and time. We love her. And one of the core questions is like, how do we decipher the languages of ecology that have an intelligence to them beyond the idea that humans are the ultimate intelligence in the universe? And I personally want to know about minerals and water. That's like kind of my core elemental connections. I work with fire too. We'll get into that with glass blowing, but I'm just kind of thinking, what is that we don't comprehend yet about systems of communication with the natural world? There's a lot of reasons why our capitalist society has sort of leaned toward this idea that some of the elements, maybe don't have thought processes or intelligence. And there's kind of a benefit to saying like, let's just keep mining this material. There's no intelligence to it. Let's keep mowing down these forests. There's not an intelligence to it. So I'm always interested in looking at that question with some criticality, but also with kind of a more tender poetic view as well. Another part of transformation and alchemical states of being for me is looking at illness, disability, and death as really important catalytic moments in a transformation cycle, which I think are so valuable and also super devalued in our culture. So in this ableist society, how do we add back in that value? How do we take those moments and include them in this conversation? I'm really into research, but I have a really maybe non-traditional approach towards it. Like, I'm not so into academic research. I think that everything is actually research if you have a disciplined attitude towards it. So I am always collecting images, but I also have like a very deep material research process. And I believe that just like world experiences are a form of valid research, right? So like I go into wilderness sites over and over and over again, like specific sites. And to me, that's a form of research that really informs my practice. And so that's how we're going to kind of get to gloop phenomena. Here are my little worm friends. These guys are so cool. They live inside of sulfuric caves, really toxic sulfuric caves in Colorado. And they exist in this ecosystem just like together in this little interdependent community with each other. And they're in total darkness. So I know there's going to be some like gross visceral elements to this talk. So I hope you guys are okay with that. So to get into some of my image research, just to give you a taste of some things that I'm looking at when I'm trying to make work. This is an ice cave in Austria, and there's something formalist about this that's going to show up in some of my sculptural work. So we've got like semi-translucent, semi-opaque kind of erosions of space that's layered. We have light coming from behind. That's going to come back into play. Here is a sulfuric fumarole. Again, kind of a toxic space is a geothermal phenomena that happens throughout the globe. But sulfur is going to come in as an alchemical material that's very important. And then on the left there, this is called a snotite. And it's like a little toxic dripping snot formation on the inside of one of these sulfur caves. So I also love this idea of super beautiful things mixed with toxic things. Things that might seem beautiful on the surface, but are actually really dangerous. Oil spills, things like that are really interesting to me as well. So kind of looking at that as maybe not so much of a binary, but having these like really blurry in-betweens. Very into American show caverns right now. American show caverns, I always associate them with like the 70s and 80s. Maybe that's because I started going to them as a child in the 80s, but I think many of them were discovered at the turn of the century. And as American car culture got more popular, going to these sites as like a tourist activity became more popular. So this idea that you're walking into a cave and there's been like this excavated little path, there's lights that are set up for you so that you're having an experience underground that's very kind of curated and feels a little bit safe. And it is like you go with your family and have this cool moment. And they're all throughout the United States and internationally, of course, but there's like a band of them that's kind of in like West Virginia, Pennsylvania, and there's a couple up here as well. Part of my field research is going to these show caverns that are in Pennsylvania and New York State. Has anyone here ever been to Howe Caverns? Wait, okay, one. I'm so surprised. Okay, so it's just a little bit west of Albany. It's really cool. I don't think they do these photo tours anymore, but I went on a photo tour where you could just be like, I'm a photographer. And like for whatever, $50 or something, someone just shows you around and is like, I'll just wait for you. Just take the photos. And it was totally amazing. There is this underground river. So this is like me in the boat. I had this incredible tour guide named Trinity, and she was like, hey, do you want me to just take you on a little boat ride? And it was like very Phantom of the Opera, which was like my elementary school crush. So just like a quick shout out to the Phantom down there with his candelabras and his little riverboat. And there's like a great moment where you like take the elevator down. There's like just cave and lodge. Like those are your two options. And then you just like press cave and then you descend like so far. And it's very dramatic. I loved it. Very goth. My material research in terms of gloop is glass oriented, actually. And glass is this like super elemental material. It's coming from minerality, but it's relating to fire and breath as well. There's a viscosity, like hot glass is actually like the texture of honey. Like people think it's really almost liquidy, but it's not. It's like thick and slow. So the viscosity is very, yeah, like almost like tar moving. And just to reiterate that, like, I think the whole point of this practice for me, if I'm looking at it from maybe more of an intellectual standpoint, is like trying to dismantle binary thinking around our relationship to nature, trying to dismantle some taboos around nature, death, what we think of as disgusting or beautiful, and just really embracing these things as maybe pleasurable, which is maybe not the way we usually think about them, and trying to contextualize some of the things that we're usually grossed out by, freaked out by, confused by, curious about, as just interesting and pleasurable, and reframing it completely. And just like a little quick shout out, not to get so deep into theory, but just like cute little quick shout out to Donna Haraway and the idea of posthumanism, which again, from maybe a more intellectual standpoint, is the idea that there's an ethics to this practice too, right? Like posthumanism is an ethical position that says like, hey, like we have positioned ourselves as humans as kind of the ultimate authority, but actually there's a different way of interacting with the natural world where we won't have that like ultimate power, and maybe we're sharing that with some other species and cohabiting the world in a different way. And this is also just a worldview that has also been introduced by a lot of indigenous cultures too. So it has been made into this more academic idea, but it has much more ancient roots to it. Just very quickly about my research in alchemy, again, just to give you like a visual of what these materials actually look like. In alchemy, the idea of the tria prima is salt, sulfur, and mercury, which represents the soul, the spirit, and the mind. And they come up again over and over again as a cyclical relationship. And we have another like beautiful fumarole that's underneath. And on the right, we have a retort. So a retort is an alchemical glass form that's used in a process of distillation. So I think about distillation a lot in my practice too. And I try not to think about distillation in terms of purity, because I think purity for me has a lot of maybe unpleasant connotations about the idea of like something can be pure. So I think of it more of a condensation experience, right? So something becoming more intense. So like alcohol is made through a process of distillation, right? So you're condensing some properties and transforming it in the process. So we have these gorgeous dragons representing the salt, the sulfur, and the mercury. And so this form, this glass form, comes up in my work a lot. And I literally just started making sculptures with salt. Like it's quite a literal thing in my practice. So I take 50-pound blocks of salt that are intended to use for livestock supplements. So horses and cattle. This is like something you see very commonly on farms. And I'm using a hammer and a chisel and water erosion techniques to make these eroded sculptures. So I actually began this practice back in 2012, and I have been evolving and refining it ever since. I started casting these forms in glass. This is a lead crystal. And I found that the process was really like the mold making process was just so hard. There's like these complex forms with holes in them. There's undercuts. If any of you have mold making experience, like, you know, it's just like it's not easy. There's these very multi-part molds that drove me bananas. But I was at this residency, a glass residency, where I was trying to make these. And I just felt like I was banging my head against the wall. I was totally miserable. And I was like, I don't see what the point is. Like, it's all about the salt. Why would I make like a duplicate of my own work in another material? And the whole time I was there, I was watching these glass blowers every day. And the glass blowers just had this really immediate relationship to the material that they were working with. And it felt like there was an intuition that was leading their process. And I was like, I think that's it. I think if I'm going to integrate glass with salt, like those two ways of working are maybe more aligned. And so I convinced these glass blowers to help me make these first pieces, which are these big blown glass bubbles that are inspired by the retort and alembic shapes of the alchemical process. And then they're like quite hot right out of the furnace, you know, about 1900 degrees, probably a little bit less because it cools down immediately when you take it out. But pressing the salt into this hot material, and we're continuing to inflate it as we're pressing. And then you end up with these two puzzle pieces. Not a lot of materials stick to glass, and especially not salt. So they're actually interlocking pieces. They're not fused together. And then I've continued with this and added color and evolution of form. I've started to understand the relationship between these two pieces more. And you get these really nice burn marks where that like interaction is archived. And again, this, I'm really looking at the idea of toxicity and beauty. So these like kind of oily colors, like this glass has a lot of metal in it. So like silvers in particular will have this iridescent quality when the light hits it. And then it turns this like super flat beige when light is not activating it. And here we're also burning the glass itself, which like as a glass blower, you would never consciously do because it's not good for the glass. You want to avoid it having those imperfections. But I love the idea of actually seeking out the imperfections and looking for something that is like a visible scar. And I've also started working with neon. This piece is called Saline Sulfur Butter. Sunrise over resting body. Illuminated nebula. And we're going to kind of, I do talk kind of in spirals, so I hope that you can follow my cyclical thinking. But to kind of go back to the idea of image making, like during this time, like around the pandemic, like I've sort of developed a bunch of these. I hadn't gotten quite so refined yet. And then it was sort of at a standstill. Like I couldn't be in the hot shop like during the pandemic. And I'm spending a lot of time actually alone outside and going for walks, mostly in cemeteries. And that was sort of connecting me back to this death consciousness practice. And then randomly I had applied for my MFA in 2019, and 2020 rolled around, the spring of 2020, and they're like, congratulations, like you have been accepted into this MFA program. And I was like, wow, am I gonna go get my MFA during a pandemic? Yeah, okay, like I guess I am. So I went to Alfred University, which is in Western New York, and it's a lot of wilderness. So this like walking alone in natural sites, just like it became my entire life basically. And also during this time period, I'm watching a lot of ASMR. Does everyone here know what that is? Yes? Okay, good. For those of you who might not know, I mean, it's like, it's a lot of things now, but basically like if you go onto YouTube and you just like type in ASMR, like a bajillion different kinds of videos are gonna come up. But it's like this idea of like kind of someone speaking really softly and soothingly at you. It's like whispering, there's different sounds, tappings. There's a lot of cosplay videos. Like this is Goodnight Moon ASMR, and she is performing as Little Red Riding Hood, speaking directly to you through the camera. And she's like tapping on all of her little things in her basket to her grandmother's house. So I just loved her like little baguette tapping, whispering to you, touching my baguette. So I'm watching a lot of that, which is really about like being really attuned to like weird details. And I was also thinking like, what is the antithesis of like a pandemic experience? And I'm like, well, it's kind of like this really like celebrational bacchanal. Like that's the opposite of what we're doing right now. And I was looking at these historic images of Bacchus and really thinking about Bacchus and Dionysus and thinking to myself that like, I don't know, there's something about like, I think they get this perception that it's like the party god, but actually Bacchus is like the god of transformation too. Like the alcohol has actually been transformed. It is an alchemical distillation substance, the wine. So it's a little deeper than just like he's the let's get drunk and party and have crazy orgies god. Like he's more than that. So I was really thinking how cool it would be to have kind of a performance piece that was devotional to these sites that I was experiencing, but also devotional to this idea of, yeah, the transformation god. And so I started taking these photos of myself. I would like walk into this stream that I was visiting every day. And I just decided there's like all these beautiful vineyards in Western New York. So I went and got these Concord grapes and did this ritual where I was washing grapes over and over and over again, different days, and just like wearing this black velvet robe in the stream. And I was just like, I would just go and do this by myself. And this was a photograph of the 4x5. And this was actually like the last project that I did in large format. I shot large format film for like 15 years, mostly 4x5 and 8x10 color film. And I did print in the darkroom color film until that kind of got a little phased out. But yeah, this is like the last series of large format that I did. I felt like it was maybe super formal, like it has this kind of cinematic film still feel to it. And it was part of a continuation of a performance practice that I had been developing. But I felt like, you know, there needed to be a video part of it too. And, you know, before I even go further, I want to just mention that like this idea of working with sight and this like collaboration with the landscape is really specific to some certain areas. And like, I'm often working in these like state parks or federal parks that are like owned by the Park Service, but these are actually like traditional indigenous territories. So I just wanted to acknowledge like that the Haudenosaunee land, which is near Alfred, New York, the Onondaga, which is also known as Seneca of Western New York, and the Mohican lands of the Catskills, these are those traditional lands. And you can always go and check out this really cool website, which is nativeland.ca, which will give you like a map of like what indigenous territories that you happen to be spending time on. So I just felt like that's something I think about too, is sort of like the history of colonized lands when you're really working in a landscape and being like, huh, like what is the history of this place and how do I have a deeper relationship with it? So as I'm spending more and more time there, I decide that I need to, you know, basically make some moving image work. So I made this multi-channel video installation. This is just one of the channels I'll give you a little quick glimpse. And basically, you know, me as this little priestess figure in my offering to Bacchus. I just keep washing the grapes, like they're disintegrating in my hands as I'm washing them. And I just keep washing them until there's nothing left. And the other thing that I'm doing during this time period is I'm just like, I kind of stopped shooting 4x5. I'm like, I don't know, like, what if I just take this digital camera and I'm walking around and I'm close looking? Like, it's a lot easier. I just felt like I could make a lot more progress in my practice by not being so attached to a certain kind of craft form, and letting go of that dogma was really freeing for me. It was really hard because I was really trained to love the craft of it. But I found a way into another experience with digital photography that I really began to love. And so these are printed on silk. This is when I stopped also printing on paper. And so these are paired with uncut sheets of stained glass. So typically stained glass is used, you know, you cut it up, you make it into other things. But I found that the full sheets actually have these beautiful, like gloopy, drippy moments that I thought were just so perfect. And they really are artworks as they are, you know, like there's people in industrial glass factories that are making them and they're just absolutely stunning. So I wanted to use those in a certain way. And also thinking of my walks in the graveyards, and these are, you know, they exist on the floor. They have kind of a gravestone moment formally happening. And as the winter came in Western New York, there were a lot less green things to photograph. So I would photograph the light on mausoleum marble walls and frozen waterfalls. On the right, the bottom right of the ice veil altar, I did try to make my own like flat glass, which is pretty hard to do. You have to like take big ladles of hot glass, ladle it onto like a steel surface, and then use a steel roller to roll it out. So it ends up having this like parabola shape, which I thought was really interesting. And so I have a silver chain that kind of mirrors that parabolic moment. And then I was like hanging them on the wall with these little tiny mother of pearl fasteners that I made. Just really thinking about the ethereal meeting the physical. Again, this is another hand-rolled piece of sheet glass and mist veil altar. And this is actually someone's gravestone, supple, which is also printed on silk habitai. And, you know, again, just really thinking about expanding this compassion for the consciousness of the earth and embracing disability and death. And then, like, I'm also starting to spend time outside at night and going into these sites, like, with my flash. So this is like, I mean, I'm still mostly doing all of this alone, and I just found this incredible peace to being in these streams and small little like waterways at night, which are like, you know, they're never super, super deep. It's not more than waist deep, but just getting really immersed in things. And I just want to take it in a little bit of a different direction because my relationship to image at this time is actually coming from a totally different vantage point than the outside. And it's really about me being the subject of the imaging. So I had lymphoma, I had cancer in my early 30s, and I went through chemo and radiation. And ever since then, my life has been me as the subject of deep imaging. And interestingly enough, Canon makes a lot of these PET and CT MRI machines, right? So like they have this whole website. This one is called the Celestion, which is such a beautiful name for it. But this idea of molecular imaging, where like there's such a deep scrutiny of looking at like cells and looking at mutations, like the PET scans are really wild. Like you get this sugar tracer that is radioactive. And then in the image, they're looking for parts of your body that are lit up by these sugary moments. And that's when you have like a metabolic abnormality. Hello. So the close looking comes from within is what I'm trying to say. So my close looking gets really, really close. And I am thinking about the earth body as kind of a patient. And this was my first sculptural photograph that I made. It's called Wart Fungus with Subcutaneous Cave Fat. It is an image of jelly fungus that's actually quite tiny. This is all photographed with a macro lens. So like, this is probably like 4 or 5 inches at most in reality, super tiny. And then we have collage from behind these incisions, parts of the interior of a cave. So again, going back to these show caverns, which are technically called, for those science-minded in here, it's a limestone dissolution cave. So again, this idea of dissolution, like, you know, things that are wet and solid meeting each other. And it just felt like I was able to think about this hyper close looking, these long experiences with the landscape, coming from the interior rather than the exterior, and then kind of getting rid of the square, getting rid of paper, and things start to evolve from there. I'm also thinking a lot about my experience with cancer, where I had this PICC line inserted into my body, which is kind of amazing because the PICC line is how you receive chemotherapy treatments. You receive like saline, antibiotics, like, you know, anyone who's had Lyme disease, you might have something like this and get antibiotic treatments intravenously. And it comes in through your arm and it goes straight to your heart. So I felt like there's this sculptural aspect to the PICC line. It stayed in my body for like at least 5 months. So it became part of my body. It's very bionic. And so I was really thinking about like, how do I integrate this idea as well? And through neon, I discovered that I could have these incisions within my work, and then the neon was its own infusion through the landscape body. The imagery that I start working with at this point is really related to these like dusk night walks through these little streams with like tiny little cascades. They're not like full waterfalls. They're like small little moments where, you know, you can wade in. And I'm really interested in these moments at the bottom of these little cascades where all of the bubbles form. It's the waterfall froth. And I see them as like having this intelligence, right? So here we go with this idea about ecological intelligence, but I always felt like they were communicating something to me, almost like a divination tool, like reading tea leaves or something, but like you're reading the froth at the bottom of the waterfall. It's always fast moving water. So I take hundreds and hundreds of photos of these little moments. And then in post, I'm always looking for like, what's that moment that really felt right? What has a graphic sensibility that's really alive? Which image is really speaking to me the most? This was a sister piece to that called Blue Froth Phantasm. This one is really interesting because people have a real perceptual distortion with this work when it gets really, really close to a material. It's like you're not sure if it's a material or an image. And I'm just going to play this little video so you can see a little bit what I'm talking about. But obviously to me, because I was there, I see it as bubbles and froth, but some people look at this piece and they think that it's like a patinaed metal. And I think that happens when you get so close to something that it starts to kind of break apart. And I'm very interested in those moments because I think that perceptual distortion that kind of requires a bit of like unknowing from the viewer, and that connected to like me feeling like going through this period of like intense illness and recovery, like I had to constantly be in a state of unknowing and at the edge of like the mystery and the abyss. So if I can replicate that in a slightly abstracted way for the viewer, I think that's a really interesting experience to try to translate, because I could never translate it into words as a narrative for someone. It's just, it doesn't go into your brain in a way that makes sense. It like freaks people out, right? But if you can get them to understand that through material experience, it has a really different impact. And then this is installed on the right at the Contemporary Jewish Museum in San Francisco recently in a show that was called First Light: Rituals of Glass and Neon, with women and non-binary neon makers from all over the world. Really amazing show. And also I just wanted to like show you a little bit of the process, because like these are soft sculptures, right? Like they're actually printed onto canvas substrate. So it's like a thick canvas, and I'm using soft sculpture techniques to make these really low profile sculptures that do have a sense of dimensionality to them, but it's not super extreme. So there's this kind of topography of the canvas and these little pieces of, it's just quilt batting basically that's inside. Some of them do have a wooden armature because when they get big, they need a little bit more support. And so I'm layering these. Some of them were sewn, some of them have different adhesives that are used. So there's a few different construction techniques that I use depending on what's going on with the work. And just to show you the back, what that looks like, and with one of the neon pieces when it's just flat and unilluminated, you can just understand it a little bit differently. This is another neon sculpture piece called Flowing Water Over Shale. And I think at a certain point I was like, okay, like I understand the neon, but I still want to work more with stained glass and illumination. And this idea of, I don't know, maybe pulling down the idea of divinity being above you and going back to this more ancient Celtic idea that the underworld and the sacred is actually right underneath our feet. Like it is the ground, it is already touching us, like it's not a faraway place. And I wanted you to feel like when you're looking at this piece, you're actually standing above it. So I wanted to be like, you're actually hovering right above this very sacred kind of cathedral of the guts of the earth. So within this, there's stained glass inclusions that are illuminated, but I was also like making handmade paper. So the like algae green that you're seeing is actually a handmade paper with a dye that I mixed up, and there's salt in there as well. I was like, how do I get salt in this project? So there's a few different materials in there. And this is kind of big too. So it's like, I would say it's like only maybe 3 inches off the ground, but it's about 70 by 55 in dimensions. And then I also started playing with these double-sided hanging pieces of like what happens when your body is physically moving around something in space, which is something that I never experienced with photography. Like, it does happen sometimes. I think some photographic artists are doing that, but just really interested in like how you can engage a viewer's body in different ways with photographic based works. This is called Alien Cave Petals. Again, more gloopy drippy things, reverse arch drip. And to give you a sense of what they look like when they're installed in a kind of multiplicity, this was my MFA show, which was like, I had this big, beautiful gallery to fill, and arranging them across the wall in a way that kind of honored the sense of landscape within them. Like, they look really awkward in a straight line. So I really figured out that I had to have them moving in a different organic pattern so that your eye could feel like things were all aligned with the installation and the work itself. And on the floor, we have salt glass and neon sculptures. I did try to make a piece that more literally integrated the image making with salt. So this is fountain that dissolves itself. And there is an actual fountain that's underneath the soft sculpture that's pushing up water through this hole in the salt. And through the course of the exhibition, it is actually dissolving the salt. It's pouring all over the photographic sculpture and creating this crust on, like, kind of, it's like a false floor to protect the floor from getting wet. And it's nice because it brought in the sound that I experience when I'm actually photographing in these like wet locations. And so it was really beautiful to hear the piece before you actually saw it and feel like activated by a few more senses. This is a more recent piece where I'm integrating stained glass. It's called Ultraviolet Dusk. This is ground oil that seeps up from the ground. The cool thing about oil, or not cool thing, depending on its manifestation in the world, is that it is actually fossilized algae. And so it is gloop. Like, it's still gloop. It's like gloop that has been transformed. And it's like this gorgeous iridized thing. And in Western New York, there is a lot of oil drilling. And so this is probably seeping up from like a location that's like near like a well that I just couldn't see, but it was like coming like in the forest. So you're just like walking in the forest, and then this is happening next to a stream. Again, very tiny, you know, this is probably no longer than 6 or 7 inches. And then the piece is actually like about 55 by 35. This one is called Cave Voids with Froth. And just to give you a sense of what my studio looks like, I have both projects kind of happening simultaneously. So I have my salt and glass. I do have to use a glass fabrication facility to blow my glass, but then I bring them back to the studio and arrange them in different formations, think about them, etc. And then I'm also constructing my photographic sculptures in the same space. So it's like mostly a clean space, but there's a lot happening at once. This is a recent project that I did for the Dorsky Museum last year. This was part of an exhibition called Notes for Tomorrow, which was curated by Independent Curators International with Carlin Benson, who is a Hudson Valley curator. And this is foam that is gathered at the bottom of like a little stream in Minnewaska, actually, right near here. And I just decided that it was fried chicken foam. So this is fried chicken foam portal and descended algae veil. These are double-sided hanging sculptures. And just to give you a sense of the detail of this, like, I am cutting these by hand with an X-Acto knife. Like, sometimes they almost look like renderings in their like documentation, but like they are physical objects. I just want to reiterate that to those people that are like only seen them on the internet and they're like, oh, what is this? Is this projection? Is it something else? So just to give you a sense of those incisions and how they feel dimensional in that format. This is the back. So the back is actually printed on silk. That's another silk habitat. And I wanted to give the viewer this sense of like, you're looking above water in 2 different locations. And in one of those locations, it's like the ripples of moving clear water over shale. And then in another one, you have this super dimensional, chunky, like foam block. I mean, the foam is actually quite large. Like, they can get like, you know, a few feet in width. So a lot of times they're kind of small, but like the really big ones after big rains, like the foam is accumulating as it's moving through turbulent waters. It's picking up like little biological agents, dead bugs, disintegrating leaves. This is a phenomena that happens in the ocean and larger lake systems as well that have waves. And it's just like all of the tiny things that come together to create a substance. And I love the idea of like, it's just sort of materializing, right? It's like a poltergeist, like taking form in front of you. It's so beautiful. And here I am printing at CPW. This is the very printer that used to be in this room. And before they all get cut apart, I put them on the wall in my studio, try to get a sense of what I'm working with. And it's a little intimidating to like actually start cutting these big precious prints. So that's always a tense moment. And just to give you a sense of what some of the salt and glass looks like in relationship to the wall sculptures, like an exhibition. Again, this is the show that just closed, the First Light Rituals of Glass and Neon show, and they are both in the space together. And then I just wanted to share a little bit about my works in progress. This was my recent residency at Lightwork, which was so absolutely wonderful. And I was able to make some of the biggest prints that I've ever made, which are about 7 feet by 5 feet. And it was so thrilling for me to scale up. I think I've always had like a resistance towards scale because I always feel like it's just like, let's make it big for no reason. It's just big. And so, all my salt and glass sculptures are meant to be really intimate, and like your body kind of moves towards them with like a gentleness because you have to approach them with a softness. And I couldn't figure out how you could scale things up and still maintain that sense of tenderness. But I feel like I'm maybe getting there with these newer, bigger pieces, because it feels like you could kind of just dissolve into them. Like they're a little bit taller than you, and it just feels like this like big, soft, frothy foam portal. So anyway, I'm really excited to keep working on this piece in particular. I'm not sure exactly where it's going to go, but just like the idea of even seeing all these little tiny, tiny bubbles at this scale is just incredibly satisfying. And again, these are all printed on canvas, so there is like kind of a weight and tooth to this. And to reiterate, kind of the editing process for me is really important. So I'm like, my archive that I'm pulling from when I'm making these is like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of photographs. So taken all over the place, but mostly in upstate New York. And these are all, at a small scale. You have to make small prints first and see how they're feeling before you make commitments to like, I'm going to make this into a larger sculpture. This is another foam piece. This has like little tiny flower buds and bubbles. And then on the lower right, this is a maquette. So I'm making these maquettes and then scaling up once I've decided my final collage design moments. And this is actually my favorite piece that's in progress, and she is called Gloop Cave Angel. And these are 3 prints of limestone dissolution caverns. And again, I'm really excited about this because it just feels like you can dissolve into it. Like when you approach it with your body, it kind of almost wraps around you in a way, which I'm really excited about. And this is what I'm working on in the studio right now. So I'm just like working through all these prints that I've made and returning to some of the stained glass thoughts and trying to figure out where I want to go. And this is the first piece that I've finished from my Lightwork experience, which is called Dissolution Mint Foam. And this is a little bit smaller. I got to make some smaller pieces, which is really fun. And if you want to follow me on Instagram, you totally can. You can check out my website. You can sign up for my email list, which I send out a couple times a year. I do a lot of shows in the Hudson Valley and beyond. And I'm just like so grateful to have all of you here today. I know it's like sitting and listening to a slide lecture can be, require a lot of patience. So I'm just so grateful for your time and attention, and happy to answer any questions you may have about the work, life, anything. I'll try. Yes, you had your hand up earlier.
There was a picture of my plant.
Oh, Oh, yeah. Thank you for asking that. A maquette is basically just a small test version of something that you're going to make bigger. So it's really a sculpture term. Like people that are making gigantic sculptures, before they buy all the materials and make that happen, they're going to make a tiny version of it, like a miniature. Just think of it as a miniature. And it gives you the template of how you're going to make it on a big scale. Yes. Maquette is the French word for model. Thank you for that info. Yes. What's a gloop? What do you think a gloop is? A gloop of, exactly. You already answered the question. It is that gloop of glue. It's the drip. It's viscous. It's the stuff of life. Other questions? Thoughts? I'm also into like the long process, the long read. So I always encourage people, if you have a question or a thought later, you're always welcome to reach out to me. I'm always interested in ongoing conversations. It can be a little awkward in the moment to come up with some deep question, so no pressure. Yeah. Classic question. Thanks for asking. So they are fragile and they're not. They're fragile only as much as you don't want to drop them. But if you do, which I have, most of the time they're okay. And people are always like, oh my God, isn't it going to dissolve? And I'm like, no, of course not. Like, you wouldn't put your painting under the faucet, so you wouldn't put the salt under the faucet. So as long as you're treating it the way you would treat like any other piece of fine art, it's going to be fine. They do like to be in drier conditions. So super, super humid rooms, like not great, but also not catastrophic. Like they will pull in ambient moisture from the air and then kind of weep it out of their body. So you end up with like sometimes little pools underneath of water. It's not great, but it's not catastrophic to the work. And over time, like my oldest salt sculptures that I have from like 2012 that have really been allowed to dry for a really, really long time period have actually strengthened. Then when you tap on them, they almost sound like porcelain or ceramic. And they are incredibly dense. So like they're very heavy. They look very fragile and light, but they are heavy, heavy, heavy objects. So they're quite resilient. Yes.
Would you be able to expand more on like finding metaphor in the landscape for disability and ableism? I feel like that's really sounds really moving.
Yeah, I think for me, the landscape was really like a friend and an ally when sometimes like the human world was maybe a bit hostile about disability stuff. And it felt like a place that I could go and there was no judgment and there was so much softness. And it was just really peaceful and restorative. And I also would just notice in nature and in the landscape that like there were aberrations there like all the time. And it was really normal and it was just part of nature, right? So I'm thinking of like burls and tree wood, things like that, you know, that are, if you were to think about the human metaphor might be seen as like othered or disabled, but like in the natural system, things are a bit more cohesive. So there's this integrated quality where there isn't like some like hierarchy or judgment. And so I felt like I was part of that kind of holistic integration of different organisms and rocks and air. And there was kind of a radical acceptance in that. Yeah, does that answer your question?
That's really beautiful. I thought that about girls.
Oh yeah, I know that's a really nice one. But you know, the foam too, you know, like I think of the foam and the froth as like, I don't know, I think many people might be like, ugh, you know, that's gross. Like the gloop, like, ugh. And there are these things that are maybe you might push them to the periphery of your consciousness when you're perceiving a landscape, right? Because they're maybe not what we think of as traditionally beautiful. So I'm always looking at those little corners for like the things that might be a little gross or a little bit other. And the natural systems themselves are never putting them at the periphery, but like our socialized consciousness is doing that. So if I can take those and give them a little bit more of a stage and actually like bring them up and like hover them above your head, then, you know, that value system is transforming a bit. So yeah. Nicole.
I have a question from the live stream.
Nice.
Daisy says, thank you for showing these works. I wanted to ask about the apertures that you cut into some of the works. Is there something specific behind your choice of where and what shape to cut?
I love that question. Thank you. So the landscape itself, like whatever phenomena is happening in the image, actually dictates the shape. So some of them kind of have more slits, I would say, as a shape, and that kind of is. I'm always looking at the image itself as the guide. So I'm never going to be like making a big star shape in these or something. I want it to feel like it is harmonious with what's happening in the image. And so some of them need shapes that are a little chunkier. It's also like, I think of it almost like, what can I get rid of? Like, what can I erase? Like if I was looking at this image in Photoshop and I had to delete certain parts of the image, like what could I live without and still feel like I understood this image? So there's a little bit of a give and take. Sometimes I cut things that I don't like later, and then I'll be like, oops, I cut that. That's terrible. And then I'll just put another image behind it. Or I'll take like another image of that texture and like just keep layering so that I've found a way to accommodate my mistakes in real time and make it work in the final piece. But yeah, I always want it to feel like it is, those choices are determined by the phenomena itself so that it's never kind of incongruous. Really good question. Thank you. Yeah.
With that question, how do you incorporate the layers more with the body? And wondering, how do you choose the layers with the spread?
Yeah. So again, like I'm doing that all when I'm in my little maquette model making process, so that I don't have to make any disastrous decisions when I'm working on a large scale and I've spent a bunch of money on a giant print. So it just involves me printing lots of different images and like trying, I'll like cut the holes first, then try one image behind it, try another one. What has like a nice contrast? What's too much kind of textural or color contrast? And trying to find these moments where there's enough tension, but it's not overkill. You know, I don't ever want it to feel too uncomfortable, but I do want it to feel like a little bit of tightness. Good questions.
I've got a kind of a weird question. I hope it's not annoying, but I'm just really interested in like some of like the commercial questions and just like the goals and just the reality that you have all these beautiful objects and there's something about them that makes you want to like makes me want to be around them. Like I would, you know, I would put one in my house. I would put all of them in my house. But I'm wondering your relationship to that. Like, do people collect these? Would that be like losing an arm? Do you have like, you know, and I don't know, just really curious your thoughts on them and long term too, where you want them to end up.
Yeah, no, that's not an annoying question at all. I think it's really practical. You know, like I do exist in an art world which has like strong commercial facets to it. So these are things that I have to think about. Yeah, people do collect my work. I don't feel like it's losing a part of myself. I feel like it's an expansion of my worldview into the world. So it feels actually really lovely to get to share those pieces because there's like, I'm continually making things too. Like I make, like they do take a long time to make and there's not a ton of them, but like, you know, I'm continually making enough. So I feel like there's always something like a new like piece that's going to come in and feel just as special to me. You know, sometimes someone will buy like a salt and glass piece and, you know, I don't really know them very well and it goes really far away. And I, you know, it's not like I get like a photo of what it looks like in their house. And I'm just kind of like, wow, I miss that, you know, miss that little friend. It's gone now, but mostly it's a lovely thing for me. And it feels like, yeah, like little representatives of, yeah, how I want to share my view in the world. But yeah, people do buy them and live with them and love them. And, you know, it's weird to see them go, but it's nice. I like doing it. Yeah. Yeah.
When you were describing perceptual distortion, that was like totally happening to me. That was like, so it was maybe more like a technical question, but like the sense of dimension, like you get such a sense of dimension looking at these pieces, but I didn't know like what was coming from the photographic image and what was sculptural dimension.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Yeah.
like, are the layers like flat or do they like?
Both. Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. Yeah, no, I mean, you've like arrived at the thing, which is like how much of it is coming out. Like when you approach it in the space in the first moments, like there is that unknown, right? And then you'll go up to it and be like, oh, it's coming out that much. And then the illusion kind of dissipates. And it's almost like a magic eye in a weird way, right? Where you're like, you can't go back to seeing it the way that you used to see it, which is kind of interesting. But
they do like protrude.
In different dimensions. Some of them are kind of thin, like the
Yeah.
ones that are stretched over plywood. I always say that that's like that fabrication technique is kind of like making a chair cushion, right? So it's like you've got a plywood shape that's been cut with the jigsaw, and then I'm pulling the canvas over that, and there is the padding still. So it's like it's soft, but it's tight.
Yeah.
So that tightness is flattening it a lot. But the other ones I have, like the wart fungus with subcutaneous cave fat piece is like coming out this much from the wall. And at the top it's thin, and then it has like this kind of,
So I don't know.
yeah. We can go back to that one. Sorry, this is kind of nauseating going so fast. This one.
Yeah, that was the one where I was like, wait, how? Yeah.
Oh wait, is this a video? It is. I forgot to show you the video. I thought through this when I was making this slideshow, and I forgot to show you. So this will give you a sense of how this one protrudes from the wall. They're all a little different. More often they're kind of thinner. This one is probably like the most sculptural.
Look, I'm more confused now.
Yeah. It helps and then it doesn't help.
The pieces that are hanging that we can see the back.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I guess I raised my hand.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
What is the dimension, or if you could just sort of speak on, so I feel like so much of your work is sort of about this sort of surroundingness and sort of the edge of the image, sort of is in our periphery, and it's sort of confusing, and as you said, they sort of like dissolve into them. When you sort of have them floating in space, did that sort of feel like a limitation in the sense that then the edge becomes like accessible physically, or you can sort of like peek around it,
Mm-hmm.
or this idea of sort of peeking behind the curtain and then it's like a totally different image to sort of like disrupt what I guess I'm more commenting than asking, but I just sort of want to hear what you think about like the idea of almost breaking this illusion, like bringing it off the wall,
Yeah.
and sort of, did you want that to be the intended effect? And then sort of what is that new effect sort of for the viewer to lose that sort of, because then even if we can see it from this flat, if we can see it from, the parallel side, we can then see the depth of it. Sort of, it feels almost like does it feel like you're giving away your secrets, with those pieces? Or does it feel like,
I think actually the opposite kind of, because you're doubling the illusion. And so like the wall for me doesn't necessarily like, the portal doesn't have to be something that is just like a single thing on a wall. So I think this one is weird because like the portal leads you to another thing. Like it is a portal to itself, actually. And it might be a little bit, it's funny. I haven't quite thought about it in this way. I'm trying to articulate in my mind, like what the experience is. Because again, like my motivation is about your body. My motivation is like thinking about how your body perceives of this portal space and how it moves around it. And your eye is part of it too, and that sense of perceptual distortion. But I think it's sort of like, it's not giving away anything because it's leading you to a place, right? Like, it's like, yes, this goes somewhere there. In the other works, it's like, maybe you think about where that goes to, right? So it's shifting a little bit of that, but I don't think it takes away too much. I think that it's just giving you a few more answers and a few more locations along the way. I love that question. Thank you. Anyone else? Questions, deep thoughts, complaints? Again, thank you so much. Attention is a precious resource these days, and I am incredibly grateful for yours. Yeah, have a snack. Hydrate.